A psychologist sat two people down in a room and watched them talk for 15 minutes. That's it. 15 minutes. No background check. No history. No idea who they were. And from that, just the way they spoke to each other, he believed he could tell which couples would still be together years later and which ones were already over. The unsettling part isn't that he was wrong, it's how often he was right. We like to believe love is unpredictable, mysterious, that no one could look at a couple and know how the story ends. But starting in the 1980s, one researcher spent decades quietly arguing the opposite. And what he found is uncomfortable, because it suggests most relationships don't fall apart from one big betrayal. They come apart from something much smaller, something ordinary, repeated thousands of times until it isn't ordinary anymore. His name was John Gottman. At the University of Washington, he built something his team nicknamed the Love Lab. On the surface, it looked like a small apartment, but couples who came in were wired to sensors, heart rate, stress, tiny shifts in their bodies they couldn't hide. And then they were asked to do the hardest thing in any relationship, just talk about their day, about money, about the argument they kept having. Gottman recorded all of it, and then he waited, sometimes years, to see which couples stayed and which ones didn't. When he matched the outcomes back to the tapes, he said a pattern emerged. In some of his studies, he claimed he could separate the couples who would divorce from the ones who'd last with striking accuracy. Numbers as high as 90%. That figure has been debated ever since, and we'll come back to why. But set the exact number aside for a moment, because the pattern he described is the part that changed relationship psychology. Gottman noticed that the couples heading for divorce kept leaning on four specific behaviors. He found them so corrosive, he gave them a name: the Four Horsemen. The first is criticism, not a complaint, an attack on character. You forgot to call becomes, you never think about anyone but yourself. The second is contempt, sarcasm, mockery, eye-rolling, talking down to someone you once admired. Gottman called contempt the single strongest sign that a relationship was in trouble, because contempt is what's left when affection has quietly drained out. The third is defensiveness, meeting every concern with an excuse, never with, you might be right. And the fourth is stonewalling, shutting down completely, going silent, leaving the room while still sitting in it. On their own, none of these are rare. Everyone does all four sometimes. That's not the warning sign. The warning sign is when they stop being the exception and become the default. Now to show about that 90%. Some of Gottman's prediction numbers came from looking backward, building the formula after he already knew which couples had split. And it's a lot easier to predict something you already know happened. Critics pointed this out, and it's a fair hit. So no, nobody can watch you order coffee and forecast your divorce. But here's what the criticism doesn't erase. Across decades and hundreds of couples, the same behaviors kept showing up in the relationships that ended. Contempt, especially, is one of the most consistent red flags in the entire field. The number's shaky, the pattern is not. And this is why it matters, even if you're happy right now. Because Gottman found something hopeful underneath all of it. The strongest couples in his lab weren't the ones who never fought. They fought plenty. The difference was a ratio. In the stable couples, for every negative moment during conflict, there were about 5 positive ones. A small joke, a touch on the arm, you're right, I'm sorry. A moment of repair after things got heated. They weren't avoiding conflict, they were outweighing it. The healthiest relationships weren't the ones with no darkness in them. They were the ones with enough small light to cover it. Which leaves one strange question. If contempt is what quietly kills a relationship, what's the thing that quietly saves one? Gottman had an answer for that too. And it isn't romance. It isn't grand gestures. It's something almost too small to notice. A tiny, easy-to-miss move that happy couples make for each other dozens of times a day. That's what we'll look at next time on Quiet Findings.